Hi, welcome to the next talk on culture, foreign policy and society in times of change. I'm in Cape Town in the Silo Hotel above V&A waterfront, and I'm very happy to meet the political expert Wayne Alexander, working for the Friedrich Naumann Foundation for Freedom here in Cape Town, to speak about the current situation in South Africa and the current challenges. Wayne, when Germans or Europeans think about South Africa, they imagine endless white sandy beaches, game drives, European lifestyle in the winelands. But before I started to travel, people asked me about if the riots from this year are still ongoing. How about the security, the criminal rates? How about the COVID situation? So how you would describe South Africa in the year 2021?
22, 21. Thank you for having me, and greetings to your guests from Germany. South Africa is living through interesting times at the moment. You spoke a bit about the riots, and that was very localized. We're a big country, but that happened largely in KwaZulu-Natal on the east coast, and we more on the west coast. And there was also some spillover into Joburg, and the relation or the connection or why that sort of was sparked related to the governing party and internal politics. In particular, our previous president was locked up or imprisoned for not appearing in front of the Constitutional Court when he needed to be, and he has ongoing criminal cases and cases against him. And that was used as a catalyst to incite the riots. Things have settled. One of the sort of things that happened in that process was there were people who took advantage of that, but there were other communities who came forward and said, this is not who we are and this is not what we do. And those communities are now rebuilding themselves. Here in the Western Cape and Cape Town where we are, we weren't necessarily directly affected by the riots. We didn't have any spillover. And so there are many other issues also that sort of describe or create the space. So we've just come through local government elections. Our political space is changing. COVID has had a huge impact on how we operate as a country and has had an impact on our society and our communities. So there are many things that are happening. The other thing that's very big is state-owned enterprises are more and more in crisis, and that's having impact on the living standards. But like any other country, we're trying to deal with our many challenges going forward. And there are still positive things to speak about at a later stage.
You just mentioned the current municipal elections that took place. While I was traveling in South Africa, I talked to many people, and I have to admit that everyone said that he did not vote, because I got the impression that people are disillusioned. They complained about the corruption. They do not believe in politicians. So this is very dangerous for the state of democracy. So how you would describe the situation and the current state of democracy in South Africa?
So I think you sort of hit the nail on the head. South Africans are feeling more and more disillusioned. And that partly might be a case of perspective, but also there are real lived experiences where there's lots of corruption, but more than just corruption, people are beginning to experience the impacts of corruption through crumbling infrastructure. You know, we have what we call rolling lockdowns, which you would most probably call blackouts, that are sort of scheduled and happen consistently, and that has impact on people's livelihoods. Also, for example, the state of water and sewage, for example, was a huge issue in the Western Cape and in Joburg and in our major metros, that the services are beginning to deteriorate, and the direct connection for many voters is corruption. The challenge also is that our politicians have also entered a very dangerous space of negative campaigning. So that builds a sort of disillusionment, and so many voters, rather than buy into the sort of fear election campaigns, have basically just said, we opt out, we're not participating. So what we've seen is people opting out. The other sort of trends we've seen is that the major parties have either stagnated or have seen a decline in their voter base. in real numbers. And the other thing that's also sort of happening is that radical elements or radical political parties have seemed to chipped away at the basis of the more centrist parties or the parties in the center. There's been a resurrection of race nationalism as well, so parties that identify with particular race groups have seen slight growth and have sort of edged away from the major, or taken away from the major parties. And all of these things have made for sort of an interesting mix. What's also very interesting is what we've seen in the election outcome is that more and more municipalities don't have a clear winner, so we're moving more and more into the space of coalitions and coalition governments. So as we speak, people are negotiating coalitions who will govern with who. The unfortunate issue is that over 66 municipalities are hung or in need of clear government, and coalitions being new to South Africa. We're also seeing more and more parties are opting out. The last time we really saw major coalition discussions was in 2016. Now in 2021, the major issue is who do people go into coalitions, and more parties are saying we don't want coalitions. So we're also sitting on the verge of maybe potentially rerunning some local government elections because voters have sent a clear messages that they are either not voting or they're spreading their vote out a bit more, and that's leading to more and more political parties having to try and work together, which I don't think the politicians with their egos are very eager to do at the moment.
In comparison with other African states, you would say it's a success story of democracy in South Africa?
At present, I'm very positive about our democracy, that voters are responding. Up until this election, we've had very decent turnout. I mean, higher than many European and even American countries. With America, we have high turnout, but this election has been lower turnout. But the clear message is not that we don't want to participate in democracy. It's just that we don't want to engage with who's presently provided or in front of us. And what we have seen is that South Africa up until now has allowed for transition in terms of power. One party being dominant, but we're now seeing that party's domination dwindling, and more opposition parties beginning to enter the space of governance, whether at a local or provincial level. So we have 9 provinces. One is governed, especially here in Western Cape, by the major opposition. If we look at the KZN results, the IFP is becoming more and more prominent at local government level, and they've made some huge gains this election, which sort of spells that maybe that province also will now be governed by another party, and other provinces might come on board. We've now for the first time brought the ANC below 50%, which is another indication that voters...
The African National Congress.
The African National Congress, so that's a clear indication that voters are beginning to rethink their allegiances and loyalty. And again, for me, that speaks to democracy that's vibrant and energetic. For many years we've sort of believed that we have basically a one-party state because people weren't willing to shift or move their votes. And now we're seeing that ability for people to change their minds and support other parties.
Now the situation of COVID-19 gets worse in Europe. When I arrived here, I was quite positively surprised about the prevention measures here in South Africa. Wherever you go, you will need to wear a mask, and you can sanitize your hands. How is the situation now with the COVID-19 implications, and how South Africa coped with this incredible societal crisis?
So the government and our President Ramaphosa from the ANC has been very resolute around following the science. And I think we've provided leadership on the African continent around vaccines, also prevention. In South Africa, there's 2 schools of thought. There's those who are pro this process, and then there's those who feel their freedoms are being limited because the protocols are so well implemented or being implemented. Corruption has sort of entered the fray, where we've found that this COVID has allowed for opportunity for people in government to steal, but by and large we've done a fairly good job in terms of allowing people to prevent, but also in terms of vaccination and testing. I think we're pushing more people to get vaccinated, and that will help us
So
start.
what's the rate right now in the society?
I think we're just around 30%. We were targeting to be around 50% by December. Hopefully we get there, but it's unlikely, to the point where we're now vaccinating on weekends as well. There's been big pushes even around election. On election day, there were some voting districts where you could actually get vaccinated and vote at the same time. So there's been levels of innovation around that. I myself got COVID, a very serious COVID, the Delta variant, which landed me in the hospital and on ventilator, and I was able to survive. I was 8 days on the ventilator,
8 days.
which you don't normally recover from, or and we're seeing. But one of the things is that I'm sort of secure that our healthcare system took care of me and will take care of others. So in many ways we're doing well. There are some challenges. We're also trying to get more and more South Africans on board in terms of getting the vaccination and also preventing. But I do understand that in other countries, things aren't as good as we have it as well.
But how did the government manage to reach the people in the townships? They're just like if you come from the airport, international airport in Cape Town, you pass Karicha, like a famous township. So how is the situation there?
So one does feel it's more difficult to work in those spaces because they're more dense and more densely and crowded. But our healthcare system is sort of targeted, or at least the public healthcare system is targeted more to the disadvantaged communities. So even in those communities that there are clinics or there are sites that provide testing and vaccination, it's not that anybody can claim that these services aren't available. In rural communities, they've also gone the process of mobile testing and vaccination. It's not perfect, but in particular, our public health system is skewed towards servicing those particular communities. Whether people comply is also secondary. I know after the third wave, we've seen lots of people again out and about partying, not following protocols. In the election process, well, this is one of the concerns that our elections is very manual. People have to stand in lines. Political events happen where people are campaigning, and South Africa has this love for big mass events with loud music as part of their political campaigning. So we've seen a lot of that. So at the moment we don't see any major impact, but in the next couple of weeks, more than likely we'll start seeing what the impact of those events were, whether they were super spreader events. But everybody is trying to do their bit. It's also part of the campaigning, so that people have been trying to point out other political parties' weakness in terms of COVID prevention and having big events. So.
And what about the impact on the economy? Because I saw many places, many restaurants are closed, many shops are closed, and I also heard that the criminality rate got higher because of this. You also see more people in the streets begging and asking for money.
I think you've sort of struck a nerve that the finances or the economy has suffered under COVID lockdown, and sometimes. And this is where the counter argument is that sometimes our regulations have been too tight, too constrictive, which means a lot of organizations or companies have battled to be able to adapt or pivot or provide ongoing employment and been able to survive it. There are some good stories where people are using more online services, people are pivoting their business towards home-cooked meals instead of running a full-on restaurant. But also alongside that, there's people who've lost or been hurt. But that's also where the goodwill of South Africans have kicked in, and also government, where there's been a big focus in many communities on how we can support each other, how can we provide meals for those who are destitute. But that's not the long-term answer. We have to rebuild our economy, and that should be a focus going forward. How do we rebuild our economy? How do we open up while remaining safe? And the first major step would be to get as many people vaccinated as possible. We're now sort of bracing ourselves for the fourth wave. And what does that mean in terms of lockdown? We're going into December, which is a high.
It's summer.
It's summer. It's when we get our most tourists. It's when people spend the most, and so businesses might be in the situation where, again, we go into that, and the fourth wave hits, and then we're in lockdown again. I mean, for example, in my family, we travel often, but for 2 years we haven't traveled anywhere. Again, we were sort of looking at a Christmas and January at home. There's a limited social space, and then those things have impact on the finances of the city as well, because we're not spending as much going out to restaurants, we're not spending as much on entertainment or even education. Things have changed. More people are working online. Schools are beginning to shrink because parents are choosing to. So the economy has been hit. In certain cases, we've pivoted and we are adapting and becoming a more safer in terms of COVID environment where we're doing more things online. But in other cases, you can't mitigate the impact. There are more people who've lost their jobs or are no longer employed.
South Africans I met during my trip told me that South Africa is facing every year a major crisis, water crisis, electricity crisis. This is quite a challenge also during COVID times when a lot of people work at home. So, for example, in this region here, you're facing and struggling with power supply. There is load shedding, so 2-3 times a day the power is shut off. If you don't have a generator, you can work with candles. It sounds very romantic, but I think after one time you are done with this. And so it's not only like half an hour, it's really for 2 hours. So also tourists staying at the guest houses, for example, if the guest house doesn't have a generator, so they will have no power, no internet, nothing. How you can run a country successfully, how people cope with this?
So there is major impact on our business and economy around load shedding. My daughter, who's now 14, we were just reflecting whether load shedding is older than her or younger than her. We've had load shedding basically for 13 years now in South Africa. It's gotten progressively worse. So now it's every other month for 2 or 3 weeks. When you're back then, you had it sort of less regularly, but it was there. And it's now progressively got worse. Part of the challenge is that we have state-owned enterprises, which are, one, they are corrupt, but also very inefficient, because it's like having a lifetime job. Nobody in government ever gets fired, or that's the sort of concept around it. So the state-owned enterprises haven't, and in particular the Eskom that provides electricity, has a lot of issues around how it develops and what it does. Also politically, we've made bad decisions. In 2009, in 1998, we knew that we needed more power supply. We needed to build more power stations. That only started in 2007. We've also then chosen to not focus on renewable energy. We've been highly sort of focused on nuclear and coal energy, because people could get money out of that. And alongside that, the infrastructure has deteriorated. Also, there's been a long reluctance, and we're now sort of turning the corner on that, a long reluctance for private businesses to come in and help and use the grid, which carries all our electricity, so that people have other options. Here in the Western Cape, that's governed by the Democratic Alliance, we're slightly better. So if there's 3 load sheddings a day, we might experience 2. Because the city and the government has been able to mitigate through wind farms and other energy sources within their purveyance to mitigate that. But still, we experience it, and in other parts of the country, it's much worse. Businesses are pivoting, households are pivoting. We've got UPSs. We're sort of discussing whether we should get a generator. I've got a friend who's totally off the grid. A few friends who have gone totally off the grid. They make the investment and they can afford it. But for the average poor person in the township, this just becomes a reality that they're the worst hit. I can go out to buy takeout if there's no electricity. For many parents or people in rural communities or in the township, that's a lot of money to spend. You'd rather want to be cooking a meal for your family, but if it happens, we're now in matric, which is the period where our matric's right, which is the final year of schooling. A lot of kids don't have electricity when they need to study, and that has impact. Students can't study because at night there's outages, or during the day you can't have lectures. So the impact is huge, and people are trying to adapt. I mean, I've traveled Africa quite a lot, and I think we're not that bad. I mean, many African countries depend on us for electricity, but we're getting to the situation where we really need to think about how try and fix the problem in one level, but also in many cases we have to work ways of mitigating, because it's a long-term problem. We're not going to get the electricity we need in the next 10, 15 years. We need to start building more.
Does the government has plans?
Well, with COP recently happening, we've now seen many countries now want to invest in the sort of electric matrix, or getting electricity that is clean in South Africa. I think they see that as a gateway into Africa. So we're excited about that, but then we're concerned that our government might eat a lot of that money in terms of corruption. But even that only allows us mitigation in 10 to 15 years, because all of these plants need to be built. All these new forms of energy need to still, you need to build the generators that will then lead to that. So in 10 to 15 years we might be in a better space, but for now we need to maintain what we have and try and slowly improve and increase the capacity so that we don't have the load shedding anymore. But for the foreseeable near future, it is a reality.
This all leads to the fact not only these problems and challenges, but also unemployment rate, for example, also here in Cape Town, for well-educated people who cannot find a job, that South Africa is facing a migration. Young people are leaving the country. There are also large communities, for example, in Europe or in the US. So young people leaving the country. How the government is facing this challenge, like the brain drain, that you're losing young people?
It's a good question. So partly, I didn't share this with you. My experience was I spent a year and a half in the Netherlands as a professional. And so many people do go and decide to come back, and part of that might be, disillusioned with where we are and the availability of jobs. Again, Western Cape is slightly better than the rest of the country in terms of offering opportunities, but this is more an entrepreneurial space where I've seen a lot of influx of my friends, because I come from the East Coast in Durban. I've been coming to Cape Town and setting up businesses and growing in that space. But again, you are right, there are limited jobs. There is potential for growth if we get our economy right, and because largely one of the big things about South Africa is that it can be seen as a gateway into Africa. Also, we have lots of infrastructure that other countries in Africa don't have. So there's huge opportunity to stay here and build, but equally acknowledge that people are making the choices to move on and move into other spaces. So I've got many friends who've also decided, okay, we're packing up and we're going to Europe, or we're going to Canada to see what we can do there. But often that leads to people sometimes coming back as well. At the moment, I don't think government is that focused on that, because the major problem at the moment is unemployment for people that are here and don't have the capacity to move out. So the more skilled you are, the more education you have, and the more resources you have, the less likely you are to be unemployed. But for people who are lower down on the scale, they have a real problem. I mean, when COVID hit and lockdown happened, one of the big concerns in our community where I come from is that everybody was staying at home, and that put additional resources, strain on the area and our Wi-Fi and all sorts of other things. But for many people in the township, things didn't change that much, because already there's high levels of unemployment, so people were already staying at home. You might have one or two breadwinners in a home of 10 people. And so when lockdown happened, it just meant 2 additional people are staying home a day, and with the other 8 people. So I think the most immediate problem for the government is how to address that. partly it might be around leveraging our skilled people and saying to us, how do you innovate? How do you build new businesses that will absorb other people? COVID hasn't made it easy as well, because there's lots of lockdowns, lots of complexity around a business. And then corruption also plays a factor, that the ability to enter the business world and run businesses is quite complex. Lots of red tape as we speak about it, lots of accreditation where government takes from you instead of trying to create a space where you can build businesses. So yeah, I think for government at the moment, the idea is how do we create more job opportunities, and sometimes they see themselves as that, responsible for that, instead of saying, well, how do we get other people into our space to be able to do that there for us, and facilitating that.
South Africa is often associated with apartheid, end of apartheid, of Nelson Mandela. It's almost 30 years ago. On 11th of November, the president at that time, de Klerk, died. So it marks also a certain, perhaps end of this chapter. But which challenges remain from that time, if you thinking back and now comparing it with the current situation?
I think the challenge that remains is that we haven't transformed our economic space. That the people that were poor then are still the people that are poor now. And that has long-term consequence, because people are becoming more and more agitated. We've had political change, but we aren't seeing that necessarily overtly in the people that are benefiting. And I think, but also we're getting to the stage where people have forgotten what apartheid looked like, and are beginning to say, well, we more than likely were better off under apartheid than we are now, without understanding what apartheid was about. So the legacy of apartheid is that we haven't sufficiently addressed the socioeconomic side of it. We're largely still dependent on apartheid infrastructure, and how, like for example, how we build our cities, how we organize our cities. We still build low-income housing far away from economic opportunities. So for the average South African, 1/3 to half of your salary is just on transporting yourself to the hub, while, for example, people that are better off stay closer, who don't need to necessarily stay closer. So we're not getting the mix right of how we organize our cities and spaces, so that people who, have you ever been to Hout Bay?
Yes, I've been to. Yeah.
So Hout Bay is this really opulent center with and it was designed for rich people. And then somehow people realized, well, we need people to work in the shops, to clean our houses, to do our gardens. And then you started, this informal settlement started creating in Zamayetu. Because people, you couldn't bus people in. It would take you 2 hours from the township to get to Hout Bay to do work there. So people then started creating their own informal space, which is now, we're now thinking, how do we make that formal? Because those people aren't going to go away. Hout Bay, which is very rich, still needs to be serviced and as an opportunity for people to get jobs. But when the city plan is thought about Hout Bay, Sandton in Joburg is another space where initially it was designed not to have pavements, no streetlights, because it's such a rich place, nobody was going to walk the streets or need streetlights. And then people started working, and they needed to get to and from Sandton, to clean the house, do the garden, to fix the pool. And now, retrospectively, we're starting to think, well, how do we redesign those spaces? I don't know if that helps you start thinking about some of the issues that we're still dealing with from apartheid that still haven't totally been answered, or communities are finding unique ways to respond to those challenges.
We talked about so many crises and challenges. So at the end, are there success stories of South Africa we can talk about? Also perhaps in terms of German-South African relations, and we didn't hear about them.
Consistently and across South Africa, there's very strong sort of connection to Germany and Germans. We've got huge communities of Germany in Capetown and in other places. And they've been constantly investing in South Africa and finding this a sort of valuable space. In my workspace, we have a finance person. Her husband was in Tanzania. He's now moved to South Africa, and they're running a very successful business that adds value to our economy, which is very positive. And there's similar other examples of that. We in the Naumann Foundation also along with other foundations, very active in the political space and well respected to influence and develop, the next generation of politicians. Some of the success story is, and sort of a hidden success story, is that actually post-apartheid and the sort of present South Africa, we've created what we call a black middle class, which wasn't there before. So, for example, me and my friends are doing much better than our parents did. So we were our first generation kids that actually got further education. Our parents didn't finish their schooling or didn't have the opportunity for further schooling. We've had it, and now our kids are having better opportunities in terms of education and access to becoming more influential. Businesses, companies are opening up. If you understood what South Africa was, it was very, very conservative space with apartheid South Africa, very conservative space, very restricted in terms of how people moved. This is not even to speak about how the states oppressed people to try and keep them compliant, but just your space, your whole environment was centered around the box that you had been provided. Your whole world revolved around that. So just in terms of being free and being able to choose where you want to be and choose what school you want to go or where you want to live, those things have changed tremendously. Also, the economy for many of us has changed. We have more. We're not there, but we're doing much better than our parents, and we have. For me, getting takeaway, going to a restaurant was a once-a-year thing, and now my kids are exposed to different cuisines. They've traveled overseas. They've traveled locally. While I was growing up, for example, I think I was on a flight once as under 18. So, that sort of middle class is growing and is quite steady. Part of it might be dependent on working in the state or working in particular spaces that might shrink over time. But certainly there's a sort of upward trajectory. Also, more people of color are entering into the economic space and becoming entrepreneurs and running businesses, which in the long run is what we need so that we start addressing the issues of unemployment. Also, living wage. People are earning better than previously, so I think that's also a great positive that you're able to do more. So there's lots of positives. I think one of the things that we also is that we're a strong democracy with some really good institutions like the Constitutional Court, the Section 9 organizations that are dealing with corruption. There's some really strong institutions that are still in place. Lots of work for them to do. Lots more can be improved, but there is, people's lifestyles in large is slightly better, or getting better, or there's opportunity for you to do better if you're able to get things in place.
My last question, you've been traveling a lot to Europe, to Germany and Netherlands. What's better in South Africa than in Europe?
The weather.
The weather.
The beaches, the cuisine. I also find that South Africans are far more, also Africans in general, are far more welcoming and open to other people. So, so there's many things that are very positive. The food is great here as well. So there's lots to be happy about in South Africa. And you travel overseas and it gives you perspective on lifestyle, and so when I was overseas or go overseas, I enjoy it for what it is, but I do miss home.
This is why I came back to South Africa. Wayne, thank you so much for sharing your insights, sharing your thoughts, and for all of you who want to join the next talk, just click the button and you will be informed. Thank you so much.
Thank you.